Okay. I think we would go on, and yeah, we have more people joining. But just to give you a quick overview of what we are about to do today. So, good morning once again, everyone. My name is Arthur Granville, and I represent the Found team. Today, you're welcome to this Architecting and Building Resilient and Secure Multi-Cloud Infrastructure webinar. And we'll be going on shortly. Okay, we still have some more people joining. I think we just need to give them like a bit. Yes, then we just go on. This is 10:03. In the next 1 minute, we just begin, so nobody misses out on anything. Today is the Power Packs Day, so I want you to just keep yourself together, pay a lot of attention. We'll be sharing a whole lot. We have seasoned experts on the call that are going to be sharing a whole lot in this webinar. So hold your horses, whatever questions you have coming in. Remember to go to the activities tab. It's at the bottom corner of your screen. It's a triangle, square, and circle icon. You just click on it and you log in your question. You don't have to wait till we're done with the webinar before you ask your question. So you could ask it in between, and one of our experts is going to answer that question. So yes, so today we are going to be participating in this Found Deimos webinar session. And if you're like me, one of the things whereby I'm obsessed about is how can we simplify cloud. Found is we build digital foundations for businesses to thrive in. And while our Deimos are rockstar partners, what they do is they help teams automate, secure, and master cloud native infrastructure. So you could also think of them as cloud architects, yeah? So, and also in today's webinar, one of the things you're going to be learning is on how to design a secure multi-cloud architecture, how to optimize cost and performance across platforms, and also how to turn multi-cloud systems into scalable and resilient infrastructure. So today we have Yakin on the call. Yakin is the head of, yes, Yakin, he's the one that just waved right now. Yeah, so he's the head of engineering at Deimos, and he brings a wealth of experience to it. So you'll be hearing from him today. And we also have Victor. Victor is the one with the headset on the call. Yeah. So Victor also is Victor is the senior site reliability engineer at Deimos. Victor also is going to be sharing on tested strategies on how you could use for your cloud. You could help your cloud infrastructure. Do you understand? And other things relating to cloud. So they're going to share on that today. And also what we have, so the first 40 minutes of this presentation would be by Victor and Yakin. Then after that, we would have a 15 minutes Q&A session. And during that session, so as I said earlier, if you want to ask your questions, you have questions in between. You don't need to wait till the Q&A session. You could just pop it in the chat, and one of them is going to take your question. Or if you have a specific question for any of our speakers, you could attach their name to the question you want answered. But whichever case may be, you have your questions answered today. So without much ado, I will feel we have like a lot of people on the call right now. Could you, if you can hear me correctly, could you just signify by giving me a thumbs up in the chat, and we know that we're good to go. Thank you. I see those thumbs up in the chat. Thank you very much. So without much ado, I would call on Yakin to take the floor. Let's go, Yakin.
Thank you, Arthur. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you, Alta, once again for the very good introduction. I'm Yakin, Head of Engineering at Deimos, where we work with large-scale enterprises across Africa and beyond on different cloud natives, on different technology-related problems and solutions. With me on the call is Victor. Victor is one of our best senior site reliability engineer that works on very interesting architecture that we're very, very excited to show you about, to show you today. So today we'll be talking quite a bit about multi-cloud. So we'll start with understanding what a multi-cloud environment is. We understand why you would want to go down the multi-cloud routes, and Victor will do a very comprehensive demo of sample enterprise multi-cloud environments, and then we can talk about some ways for you to get started with a multi-cloud environment. So to kick it off, right now, how many, maybe with just thumbs up or just show of some emojis, for example, if you or your organization are using multiple cloud tools, can you just give it thumbs up just to do a quick survey? Yeah, I can see quite a few of those, right? So, according to Gartner, a multi-cloud strategy is a deliberate use of cloud services. So from different public cloud providers, usually for different the general same class of IT solutions, usually infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, not necessarily software as a service, right? But the real-world applications of multi-cloud has expanded quite a bit. Multi-cloud is usually an hybrid of different cloud environments, and those cloud environments could be, for example, your on-prem environment connected to different workloads running in the clouds, or you're using multiple cloud partners, or you're using even different private cloud environments for multiple reasons. And the funny thing is most organizations are already using multi-cloud already. According to the same survey, 81% of public cloud users are already working with 2 or more providers. So multi-cloud usually happens organically, usually happens incidentally in a lot of large-scale enterprises, whether that is for specific reasons like compliance or trying to solve specific problems, or sometimes it just happens because you require certain tools. It just happens because some parts of your team just prefer to work with certain tools across with certain tools that are different from your cloud environment. So some key characteristics of the multi-cloud, of a typical multi-cloud setup is this, right? So intentional use of multiple providers. You are quite strategic and intentional with the way you're distributing your workloads across multiple clouds, right? Sometimes this happens for you in the case of things like an acquisition, for example, where companies acquire another company with an entirely different stack, or it happens where you want to take advantage of some of the tooling that are available on other clouds. That's usually one of the quick entry points into a typical multi-cloud environment. But another key characteristic of a multi-cloud environments are portable workloads. Previously, it wasn't as easy to work across multiple cloud because you had specific VMs, you had specific machines that you had to fine tune and calibrate delicately. But with this multi-cloud environment, for example, with the current modern technologies, right, leveraging tools like Docker, leveraging tools like Kubernetes, for example, it is much easier to move workloads across different cloud providers seamlessly, and you have to some extent anyways you have some measure of sameness across that when you're transitioning tools. And then also the rise of open source tooling like Terraform, like Kubernetes, for example, has made it similar. So when a Kubernetes cluster is running across AWS, whether it's running across GCP, whether it's running across Azure, a large part of the experience, of course, each provider probably going to add maybe some specific storage drivers or some networking layers and so on to it, but a large part of the experience are usually very seamless, and so it makes it quite seamless to deploy tools across multi-cloud. But multi-cloud isn't necessarily isn't necessarily a golden bullet. It is a tool, and usually, like most engineers, the answer to every question is, should I do something? The answer is usually, it depends. So should I go multi-cloud, right? So it depends, is what most engineers will tell you. So for example, multi-cloud can be quite challenging because now you are not dealing with one tool anymore. You're now dealing with multiple cloud providers, which leads to increased complexity. You have to know how AWS S3 differs from GCP's GCS, for example. What are the differences between them? How do you configure APIs, resource management, and so on, right? And then security is a big one also, right? So the cloud can be very dangerous in the sense of a misconfiguration can expose. We've seen a lot of exposed databases. We've seen a lot of exposed PIIs out there. So in a multi-cloud environment, this opens up more holes in the system if it's not properly managed, right? And a big part is networking and connectivity, right? So you go from having all your workloads, for example, in a single cluster or in a single VPC, and now you have to work across multiple providers. What are some ways to do that? What are some ways to ensure that you're having good performance and low latency between this, and also secure connectivity? You don't want to expose up your networks unnecessarily, for example, right? And then finally, operational work overhead, right? So now your teams have to work with multiple cloud tools. They have to work with GCP, they have to work with AWS, they have to work with Azure or Huawei and so on, right? And then each of these have their own roles around them. Each of these have their own knowledge base around them. Luckily, a large chunk of them, the knowledge does transfer to some extent, but each of them also have their niche domain that you do have to build up on. So it can add quite a fair bit of operational overhead because now your teams have to learn and be more familiar with more of this. So why in the first place would you want to even explore multi-cloud? I mean, this is a multi-cloud webinar, and I just spent some time just talking about why you shouldn't do multi-cloud. So why would you even want to do it in the first place, right? So these are some common multi-cloud scenarios that we see across Africa and beyond. A common one is usually enterprises wanting to, ensure uptime and redundancy across regions. As you keep growing, you want to ensure that your services are not brought down by a particular provider's downtime. You want to bring services closer to maybe you want to take advantage of, for example, the GCP data center in Johannesburg, for example, that recently just launched, right? So the different resilience scenarios leads to an embracing of multi-cloud. Disaster recovery is a very common scenario. Usually, for example, you want data is the lifeblood of an organization. So we've seen multiple scenarios that usually involve, for example, 5% they keep a cache warm in another cloud environment just for redundancy, just for disaster in case. But this, of course, has to be properly designed to ensure that in the case of a disaster level event and you do need to fail over to the other cloud environments, your systems are up within the shortest period of time. Data compliance or just compliance in general. This is also a very common scenario that we see quite a lot, particularly in industries that we work with, particularly in the financial services, going about a lot of fintechs, for example. most countries usually have some data boundary rules or data residency laws where data is not allowed to leave a specific geographic location, for example. So large-scale banks across Nigeria, across South Africa and beyond, so a large chunk of which we work with to help implement some of the services, some of this architecture, then have problems where, okay, we have this on-prem data center or on-prem or in-country data center that we need to work with, but we also want to take advantage of the latest innovations and all the best advantage of the cloud, for example, right? So then those are usually some very interesting architecture to design and to work with. So now to further drill into why multi-cloud, a very common use case that usually happens organically is the best of breeds. So most organizations using multi-cloud actually gravitate to multi-cloud because of a specific reason. So for example, each cloud nowadays, each cloud offers the same suite of services, but some may perhaps be better optimized or industry leaders in certain areas. And a good example is Google Cloud, for example. The BigQuery tooling, the Vertex AI model guiding, those are some of the industry leaders in that regard. They're some of the best tooling in that regard. So we find a lot of organizations wanting to take advantage of BigQuery, wanting to take advantage of Vertex, wanting to just take advantage of tools like Gemini, especially in these days of AI proliferation, for example. AWS, on the other hand, has some of the broadest, it actually has the broadest compute options in the industry. So it's very flexible. It allows you to run lots, it's most organizations, a large chunk of organizations start with AWS, usually because also AWS chosen a fair amount of credits. So most people starting off with AWS. And then Azure, for example, Microsoft is still a dominant player in most enterprises, for example. So Azure's seamless integration with Microsoft is also another reason for people to use Azure. So sometimes you just want to take the best services regardless of where you're running your existing workloads. Then having flexibility and negotiation power is also a very valuable tool. Just being able to negotiate with these different cloud providers. At Deimos, we work with different cloud providers, and we found that it actually gives you a significant amount of leverage in just negotiating the best deals, the best cards, for example, or the best reserves instances, sometimes when you're working across multiple clouds, keeping your options. And then one very common thing we've also seen is cost efficiency. For example, Huawei Cloud, who we also partner with and work closely with, is one of the fastest growing cloud providers, and it has some of the cheapest compute options that we've seen across all the different clouds. So for organizations that can use that, it's a very good option also for them also. And then just operational overhead, all right? So you, depending on just a single cloud vendor. Now, these cloud vendors usually have a large range of services, but also you don't want to, sometimes you, depending on the scale of the organizations, you don't want to be beholden to different organizational constraints, right, of this more cloud environments, right? So, for example, recently, I think one of the joking, we've seen a lot of memes around it where OpenAI is having the option with Microsoft to have a more flexible and be able to work across other multi-cloud. That's an extreme case because they want more compute, for example, right? So sometimes it does make sense to spread your workloads across multiple cloud also. So now I would hand you over to Victor. We've spoken quite a bit about multi-cloud. Victor is going to walk us through a sample multi-cloud environment and different options to implement it. Over to you, Victor.
Thanks, Akin. As everybody has mentioned, my name is Victor, and I'm a senior SRE here at Deimos. We have the privilege of working on a lot of multi-cloud solutions for various clients, and so I'm just going to walk you through some example architecture and some of the things to think about when you're designing a multi-cloud system. So for this particular sample, it's a multinational e-commerce company with millions of users and operating in several African countries. And just to give you context into the architecture, so AWS is their primary cloud. Why AWS? They probably started on AWS and had expertise there. And they also got maybe free credits for 6 months. So it got started on AWS and now they kind of got locked in. But most of their workloads are AWS. They have GCP because it offers them some superior products like the BigQuery analytics for BigQuery Omni. It's also for their offsite backups and some disaster recovery. And again, other premium, maybe AI or ML tools. For example, Google has a really good Vision API when you want to categorize things or get stuff from your images because they train it on Google Photos and it's far superior to most of the competition out there. And then they have on-prem. So on-prem is for specific workloads tied to data tenancy requirements. So think about payment data in countries like Egypt. And this is a trend that we're seeing across the world, but also in Africa, where countries require you to host some data, especially financial data within the country. So what does the architecture look like high level? So this is a simplified diagram. On the left, they've got AWS with their primary services. They've got a Kubernetes cluster, EKS running in there with their sales and order related services. This talks to a Postgres instance, and they've got some serverless functions and an API gateway because they're probably talking to multiple services across different clusters in different regions. And then they've got a transit gateway. A transit gateway allows them to communicate to their other clouds in a scalable way. It's much more scalable than your site-to-site VPN connection, but it of course has its complexities when it comes to setting up and managing. And then on the right, we have their data center. So probably running on VMware, and they've got a self-managed cluster inside there with their payment service and a managed database. This is a Postgres managed database. And then finally, we've got the GCP infra. In this case, BigQuery Omni. BigQuery Omni allows them to now query data from an S3 object store. So they're able to query data from AWS, or maybe they're using an open source S3 compatible object store like Min.io. They're able to query all that data from different clouds and visualize it on BigQuery Omni. And then eventually, I think, visualize it, on Looker Studio, so that execs have one place or salespeople have one place to look at all the data. So that's what a high-level architecture or the architecture looks like, simplified. So a few key principles to think about when you're designing multi-cloud systems is, one, you really want to use open source tools and cloud agnostic tools. So here you're thinking open standards. How do you use things like OpenTelemetry to make sure that you're not locked into one particular company's tools? You also want to avoid vendor locking and building so much around a vendor. When they change things or you need to build something on another cloud, you're really tied in. And you also want to ensure that you have a secure and scalable network, as well as implementing consistent security and governance across all your clouds. You want the policies to be the same everywhere and users to have the same permissions across clouds. And you want to make sure you avoid as many gaps as possible, because gaps is typically what malicious actors will exploit when they're doing attacks. And then you also want to make sure you have observability across all these clouds in one standard place to look at. So one thing we're going to talk about that touches on all these principles is observability. So we now have our 3 environments, but we also have a GKE cluster here that's running some machine workloads. And the key thing here is the hotel collector and hotel exporter. So OpenTelemetry is an open standard for your observability metrics and telemetry that can be used on your backend, on some of the operators like your managed database inside a cluster or your Redis, and it can also be even used on the front end. So by using OpenTelemetry collector, this is one unified standard, and they're using this one tool across all of their 3 different clusters in all these different clouds. And then they export these metrics using the hotel exporter, which exports them to their observability stack. So the benefit here is they don't have to implement different tools across all the clouds. They're not locked into any particular vendor because GCP has its own telemetry solution. I think it's Stackdriver, and they're not using that. They're using one standard across all the clouds. So what they use in EKS, they can easily just port it over to GKE. And then they're able to export all these metrics into their observability stack. And this is important because maybe the infrastructure team uses Prometheus and Grafana to visualize their metrics. They don't want to look at a dashboard for AWS and for GCP. They want to look at one standard view where the filter is you're changing is the cloud and maybe the region. And then on the Datadog side, the dev team probably already had Datadog on the EKS side, and now they need to run this payment service in this VM, in the VMware data center setup because of the data regulation. And now they simply just need to plug into the hotel exporter, and this exports it in a standard that Datadog is able to understand, and they get to leverage all the metrics that they already had. So here they're not locked in, and they're able to leverage existing work that they had done on the AWS side and just port it over to the other side. Another area we can look at is security. So on the security end, you want consistent security and governance across all your environments. And so we'll start here with the 3 clusters. Now we have AWS IAM, GCP IAM, and maybe some sort of RBAC authorization tool inside your cluster. So you could manually go in, and I could give access to Yakin on GCP. I could give him access on AWS and then the data center. But if Yakin leaves or he needs permission to look at databases, I have to manually go do that. Or even if I'm doing it through some CI/CD, I have to go do that per environment or per cluster. But when you think about using an open standard and connecting everything together, we're going to use identity management. So we have Okta at the very top here, or Google Workspace or Active Directory. Basically, Yakin has one identity at the top here. And then we're leveraging the integration between GCP IAM, AWS, and our RBAC tool to ensure that if Yakin logs into the data center and he wants to do look at the pod logs, he's able to just get those permissions issued to him in one place with a policy, and that's consistent across the entire environment. Because the auth token is issued and he gets access because he has a policy up here that says, hey, Yakin can have access to this cluster. And if Yakin offboards for whatever reason, we just have his identity deleted or deactivated here. And that cascades downwards across all our tools. And on top of using identity to manage your access within your clusters, you also want to use identity to manage access to some of your applications. So here on the AWS side, we've got an Argo CD dashboard. Argo CD is a CI/CD tool for deploying some of your infrastructure. And we want to make sure that Yakin also has access to this, but we just don't want it on the web. We also want to make sure Yakin is allowed to access it as one of the developers. And so we can use Cloudflare Zero Trust and connect that into our existing identity management solutions. And he simply logs into the page, and he gets, once he's in maybe with the VPN, he's able to just click a button and it authenticates back to his identity. He does all his MFA and he gets access to Argo CD. And within that, we can also give him specific rights within Argo CD. So maybe he should only view applications, but he shouldn't have the right to be able to delete or resync an application on Argo CD because maybe he's a backend developer, but he needs some context into errors and logs. And finally, again, still open source tools and standards. We've got the sysdig agent. So sysdig has an agent that uses eBPF that allows you to look at logs at the kernel level, and you can deploy this on all your node instances across your 3 environments for every node that you have in every cluster. And so instead of having to think about runtime security from an AWS perspective or GCP, we're now leveraging an open standard on top of a purchased product, in this case sysdig, that allows us to get logs on maybe Yakin is trying to initiate a payment for himself. And so he's trying to enter the payment service pod and send some money to his bank account. And so now we see that that bad actor has happened and a malicious activity has happened. And we get this one unified view to be able to see how everything is happening. So just to reiterate, some of the principles think about is open standards and cloud native tools. Think about consistent security and governance. Think about designing for observability at scale. How do you make sure you know what's happening across your clusters and easily? And I'd also say avoid repetitive work or toil. If you can implement something in one cloud once, there's no need of you having to implement it several times in other clouds. Just make it as simple as possible so that you can scale quickly. Because at the end of the day, a business survives because of its ability to innovate and scale and build faster than the competition to meet its needs. Yeah, I think that brings me to the end of that. Back to you, Yakin.
Thanks, Victor. Yeah, that was a very cool looking infrastructure. And yeah, so how exactly do you get started
Sorry,
on building?
Yakin, hold on a bit. I think we have a question for Victor. From Jubril. He says, how long will it take averagely to implement a multi-cloud architecture for a business? The e-commerce platform presented on, that's the one he talked about earlier. So maybe you could just take that before we continue.
Sure, I can pick that up.
Okay.
Cool. So how long it will take would clearly depend on the maturity of your engineering team, of your, more importantly, of your infrastructure. So it could, if you're, for example, leveraging open source tooling, you don't have a lot of vendor lock-in, it could take as little as a month too. But even before jumping into implementing, the first step is understanding why exactly do you want to go multi-cloud, doing an assessment, which I'll be covering in very soon. So understanding, doing an assessment actually, and then understanding, okay, what are the priorities, what are the workloads you want to do. You're probably not going to start with a full-on integration from start. You're probably going to start with specific workloads to solve specific problems, and then take it from there. Cool.
Yeah, maybe
So, yeah, Victor.
Just to add something to what Yakin said, another tip if you currently are in multi-cloud is, again, try use open source tools and open standards to avoid vendor lock-in. Initially, a lot of companies will be like, hey, this GCP stack trace is available with the click of a button. And so it's exciting, you get it done and tell the managers, I got it done. But then now when you need to move to a new cloud, you have to redo your entire observability stack because you're so tied into GCP. But if you went to the open standard and you spend some time on it, it pays dividends down the road when you need to switch to another cloud provider. It doesn't pay dividends immediately, but you need to, of course, communicate that value to the businesses. Hey, 1 year down the line when we're going to another cloud, it's going to be a lot easier to get observability up and running.
Cool. So let's continue now. So getting started. So like I mentioned earlier, you're probably running a multi-cloud environment already. So whether you're getting started in the sense of properly now taking the time to define your multi-cloud strategy or your multi-cloud infrastructure, the first step is assessments, right? There needs to be a clear value-driven assessment of what exactly are you optimizing for? Are you optimizing for cost? Are you optimizing for resilience? What performance, or even just compliance? What is the role of each cloud provider in each of these? And yeah, and after that, that's actually then decides exactly where you're going to start. It decides what the priorities are. What workloads, for example, would benefit most, which one from, whether it is, if you're optimizing, for example, for cost, right? So is it a compute workload? How exactly do you break up the service boundaries of the application and so on? So you prioritize. And a critical step during the planning phase or preparation phase that a lot of teams miss is the talent and architecture evaluation, right? So in this case, you're evaluating the skills of your current team, right? So what if we move this critical workload to a cloud provider that none of our team has any context or any insights or knowledge on how best to support, for example, right? That is a very scary position to be in. So that's where someone like a cloud partner or a technology-driven partner like Deimos comes in, where we can ensure that your team and your architecture is suited for the cloud, helping you design it. A very common engagement that we do with a lot of enterprises, especially when they are migrating to the cloud, is due to our extensive experience with different technologies at the highest scale level. We usually work with a lot of enterprises in designing their multi-cloud environments and implementing some of those best practices that companies all across the world, including Fortune 500 companies, are using, right? So we help them with this and ensure sure that their teams can work on this infrastructure. Here are some key considerations for multi-cloud. So now you've done your assessments, you've known, you know where you want to start, you know what the things that you would like to prioritize. What are some of the key considerations before you get started? Right. So the first thing is security. We at Deimos, we strongly believe in shifting left on security. Security shouldn't come after. Security is a day zero consideration, particularly in financial institutions and anywhere you're keeping data, basically, anywhere you're keeping PIs, for example, security should be a day zero operation. So adopt a uniform-based security baseline, define policies, what is the expectation across all providers, right? The next step is compliance. So now you want to go multi-cloud, right? Can you actually go multi-cloud if you are in, again, a financial institution, again, for example, right? You can't move your data past certain geographical workload. If you're a US-based organization, for example, if you have US customers, for example, can you run workloads on Huawei Cloud, for example? So these are very integral day zero considerations also for your multi-cloud environment. Then the really cool, a very important part is architecture. So how do these components talk to each other? How does networking work? How does data management work? How does the data flow from left to right, for example, right? And then the automation that supports this. Like Victor mentioned, you don't want to repeat tasks. You don't want to keep doing the same thing across multiple clouds. So some level of automation, again, leveraging open source tooling is strongly recommended. Then governance. So this is a one part that we don't pay attention to until it is too late. Yeah, so even in a single cloud, we've had incidences of clients going to, for example, $1,000 daily spend overnight going to something like a 50K or 70K daily spend without any tracking. So in a multi-cloud environment, it is much more difficult to do. So you have to be much more intentional about your cloud cost management, proper cost allocation, leveraging proper FinOps principles to ensure that you are not putting your organization at risk of serious debt, for example. And now that all those considerations have been put in mind, it's a good idea to start. But piloting with a small, you can do a quick pilot. So multi-cloud, you can pilot with a simple workload, for example, just to get a feel. It's multi-cloud, right? We have the capabilities for it to validate your architecture, validate your compliance, make sure that your organization is ready for this multi-cloud environments, right? So, and usually we recommend starting with non-critical workloads because it's never a good idea to experiment with production resources or with the most important parts of your business, right? So again, we're doing all this to drive value for your enterprise, and you don't want to impact that value negatively while working on this. So piloting is a good idea. Your team gets good experience, you know what works and what doesn't. You understand better intimately beyond just drawing the architectural diagrams. And so at Deimos, for all attendees of this webinar, to help you get started with your multi-cloud to help you get started with your multi-cloud environment design, we are offering a free consultation call just for you, whether you are considering going multi-cloud, whether you're thinking of how best to maximize your multi-cloud environment. So you'll be on a call with some of our most senior engineers working across the biggest enterprises across Africa. So we do, and we can help discuss a number of things on the call. So for example, just doing an assessment, is multi-cloud the right strategy for your organization? Have you maximized the best of your current cloud investment, for example? So and then the next step is, okay, what about your team, for example? Do they have the right skills? Where are they lacking? Where can we support you? We have certified experts in every one of these clouds. will cater to different needs. For example, where are the bottlenecks? What do you think your team is perhaps not as strong as? Is it the database? Is it the networking layers, and so on, right? Then, of course, also we are with designing of the architecture and the implementation support, for example. So properly designing a secure, zero trust multi-cloud infrastructure that is scalable and also very cost efficient also. So we can work hand in hand by you, or just give you some pointers on how best to do that, which is some of the benefits that we give to all organizations that partner with us and listen. And with that comes to the end of this webinar. We would start taking questions. We already have quite a lot of questions, but just before we start the questions, taking questions, Liza just dropped the link to the survey in the chat. We would really appreciate your feedback so that we can better optimize for the next iteration. Cool. So taking questions, we've already answered Jabril's questions. Oh, okay. We also have a question from Anonymous. How would a team go about optimizing performance and leveraging the strengths of each cloud platform in a multi-cloud architecture? Oh, that's a good one. Victor, you wanna take that? Oh.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'd start by focusing on the problem or the why to try and understand, what problem are we solving? So we need to add some Vision API capabilities to identify some images to improve our product for the customers. And then I'd look at what are the requirements or what does success look like? We've implemented it and we need a superior product to our competitors. So that means we evaluate who has the best Vision API tool out there in the market, and then also factor in stakeholder needs, followed by that. So yes, Google might have the best, but it might be extremely expensive compared to somebody else. So then you factor that all in together, and it's really balancing customer needs, engineering needs, and business or stakeholder needs, and trying to figure out which tool gives you the best value for money. You might find that maybe AWS has a superior product for running your machine learning workloads, but then you've got $100,000 worth of credits on GCP and you need to test out this product. So yes, AWS might be superior, but you're gonna spend zero if you use your GCP credits on that. And so it depends, like Yakin keeps saying, but you really have to say, look at those three things and start with why. Always start with why, and don't get too excited about that fancy technology because maybe it's DeepSeek. Look at what solves your problem best. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Victor said, I think a very good start is also just understanding. So people say optimizing performance. What exactly do you mean by optimizing performance? What performance are you optimizing? Is it your database performance, for example? Is it your connectivity? Is it your reducing the latency within your services, for example? So a good thing to actually even invest in is just in expanding your observability layer, better understanding the behavior of your application, using a tool like Datadog, which we love at Deimos and use quite a bit, and which we also partnered with, or using something like Grafana, which is also excellent. You better understand, okay, where are the performance gaps in our infrastructure, where are the holes in the infrastructure? Then when you do start optimizing, you know exactly where to go with, and it's not just it's a data-driven exercise and evidence-backed. Cool. Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I think a question just came in. Give me a moment to pull that up.
Okay, I think I said it goes.
Okay, yeah.
What are some quick actionable takeaways that my team can implement immediately to improve our organization's multi-cloud security and resilience? Very good question. The first key takeaway is to reduce your vendor lock-in. or to be intentional about doing any sort of vendor lock-in, right? So open source tools are great, and right now, nowadays, the risk of them is even more magnified because, so for example, if you're using an open source database compared to a proprietary database, most of the time you don't even have to bother self-managing these databases. For example, you can use managed offerings if you're deploying something like a Postgres, for example, across GCP, across AWS, across Azure. You are going to have a similar experience without necessarily having to manage it. So having clear, avoiding vendor lock-in and leveraging a lot of open source is a fantastic way to start. Then investing in tools like IAC, like Terraform, that's an infrastructure as a service. Tools like Terraform is also great because it allows you to automate and clarify, move away from ClickUps for your infrastructure, which helps you audit your infrastructure a lot more. That's an interesting question. Audit your infrastructure a lot more. And then also, once now you're working across multi-cloud, a good thing is then to design centers of excellence. So what are the components that can be shared across this multi-cloud environment? How do you share knowledge across this multi-cloud environments? How do you share knowledge across the different patterns? And yeah, these are some actionable takeaways that you can start with ASAP, right? Victor, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, you can reach out to Deimos.
Yes, that's an excellent place to start. Yes. Okay, cool. Alvin, okay, very good question. So Alvin says, how do you manage different conformance policies like AWS configure, and you're also in GCP, which has its own? Do you have a single plane of view? That's an excellent question. Yeah, that's an excellent question. So I think we touched on it briefly above, right? So this looks specifically around IAM configurations or different resource management policies. To start with, so when we do say multi-cloud, a lot of organizations still have a primary cloud. So you will likely, in the sample that Victor showed, for example, right? So the primary cloud was AWS. They were leveraging on GCP, and then they were leveraging also on on-prem, for example. In that case, a lot of the IAM configurations were moved where possible to something like AWS, or more in this case, because they were leveraging a zero trust environment, they were leveraging Cloudflare for a lot of that, right? Actually, we've also seen one of our largest clients, for example, uses Okta to federate policies across all their different services, that is across workspaces, because they're also using Google Workspace, for example. So that's a very common pattern where you're using something like an Okta, a zero trust tool to federate your different IAM policies from a top level. So that is one way to do it. Another way other organizations may also have may be to federate from the primary workload. In this case, sometimes AWS, if it integrates well with other tools, but usually the go-to tool is to use a zero trust tool. Victor, anything to add to that? And do we have any more questions?
Yeah, just open source again. Like Ekin said, you have a primary cloud, and in some cases, you might not have a tool, but you need those policies or that access to go down to your other cloud. I think there's an open source tool on GitHub that allows you to sync your AWS IAM profiles into your Kubernetes cluster and tie them to RBAC, such that you have the same, EKS setup going on in your self-managed cluster. So yeah, again, look at open source tools that are available to help you solve those unique challenges.
Yeah, wow. That would be cross-plane. Yeah, I'll just drop a link to that.
Okay, thank you very much, Ekin and Victor. Thank you for answering those questions. Oh, okay, yes, Ekin just dropped that in the chat, and you could also copy that. And just a quick reminder, we had a link dropped on the chat earlier for you to fill our survey form. So when you fill that form, at the end of the day, you're also going to get email in case you want to get like an assessment or implementation support concerning your multi-cloud infrastructure. We'll get that. We'll get a mail down to you, and we'll see how we can set that up. So before we go, I'll just give us some time to fill that form. And also, if any other person has a question you want to ask, we could still take just one question. We're about, let's say we've got like 7 minutes before we call it a day. But yeah, we could also take, I think Yakin is still fired up for more questions, and Victor also. So if you've got any other question, you could put, okay, yes, we have Alvin's hand is raised. I don't think, can he unmute, or maybe he could type that in the chat if he.
Yeah, he'll need to type it in the chat.
Yeah, Alvin, please, you could type it in the chat. If you don't want to use the Q&A, the chat is open for you. You could just type it quickly in the chat, and we'll have them take your question while we fill out the survey form. Okay, so just with emojis, how's the session been for you? You could just tell us, was it impactful, insightful, was it boring? Let us know. Let's know so we know how we could improve next time. Okay, great. I see a lot of reactions, positive reactions. Okay. So Yakin and Victor did justice to the session today. Wow, that's good. We're glad a lot of people could learn a thing or two about their cloud infrastructure. So yeah, we're waiting on Alvin to drop his question in the chat, and we'll get that before we call it a day. And also with any emoji, could you show us, could you just let us know if you filled up the survey form? Just a thumbs up would do if you filled it up. Let's know how. Okay, great. See some thumbs up. Very good. So we'll reach out to you soon with information in case you need an assessment or something on your cloud infrastructure. Thank you. Still waiting on Alvin. So again, I think the question coming is a bomb because it's taking a lot of time to get into the chat. So hope you're ready to answer that,
Yeah, I'm mildly terrified, but ready.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Still waiting.
I can see it's now in the Q&A.
Okay. Check in. Yakin, can you see it? I can't see it on my end.
No.
I'll read it out. How
Okay.
do you manage different conformance policies like AWS configure, and you're also on GCP, which has its own? Do you have a single plane view of you?
Oh, I think.
Oh no,
I think.
that.
Yeah.
Okay,
So we've answered that. I think you may have a follow-on question. What we can also do, you could reach out to us, maybe via email, or we could. I just have a quick call after the session, Alvin. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So Alvin, in case you're still trying to type your questions, one thing we're going to do, if you have filled out the survey form, you could reach out to Deimos, and we'll also reach out to you. The Found Deimos team will also reach out to you and would answer all your questions on your multi-cloud infrastructure, and we'll let you know how to go on from there. So with that, we have come to the end of today's webinar. I trust that a whole lot of people here have learned a thing or two on how to implement multi-cloud infrastructure in their various organizations. So remember, I would reach out to you at the end of this webinar, and also from there we could take your we could give you like a free assessment on your multi-cloud strategies, and also we could help you with implementation and support moving forward.